Happy Thursday! All right, let's pick this book up where we left off. A serving girl came through the door. Oh, and it's still Monday, May 27th, 1776. Isabella and Ruth have been denied their freedom that was promised to them. And they were being brought to the big city in Rhode Island. They lived in a little city in Rhode Island, too far away. And they were being sold at a tavern by Miss Mary's Finch nephew, Robert Finch, who is not a nice guy. And they were being fed in the kitchen. Let's kitchen back up. A serving girl came through the door and stopped. "How did you come to be with that man? I thought you were at Miss Finch's place." I quickly explained the dizzying events of the last 2 days. There's no telling what happened to the lawyer. Boston's in terrible confusion because of the war. First the King's army, and now Washington's army. What should I do? The words came out louder than they should have. Shh, you have to use your head, said Jenny. I grabbed her hand. Could you take us? You knew, Mama. I'm sorry, Isabel. I dare not. But Bill opened the door and poked his head in. He wants the girls. You better hurry. A thin woman stood next to Mr. Robert. Her plum-colored gown, that's purple, was well sewn. An expensive lace trailed from the small cap on her head. She was 45 years old, perhaps. Pale eyebrows, small eyes. A fading yellow bruise circled her right wrist. She looked us over quickly. Sisters? 2 for the price of 1. Hardest working girls you'll ever own. What's wrong with them? Why such a cheap price? My haste. He's in a hurry, that's what haste means, is your good fortune. These girls were the servants of my late aunt who passed. I mourn deeply. Not. I must quickly conclude the matters of her estate. The recent unrest, you know. A man joined the woman, his eyes suspicious and flinty. He wore a red silk waistcoat under a snuff-colored coat, snuff is brown, and with silver buttons, a starched linen shirt, black breeches. Breeches are kind of pants to the knees. And what do you take in the current situation, sir? Are you for the king, or do you support the rebellion? I pledge myself to our king, sir. Washington and his rabble may have taken Boston, but that's the last thing they'll take. The stranger gave a little bow. My name is Elihu Lockton, and I'm at your service, sir. This is my wife, Anne Lockton. Mr. Robert bowed politely in return, ignoring the muttering at the table behind him. May I offer you both some sup and drink that we might get better acquainted? They all sat, and Jenny swooped over to take their orders. Ruth and I stood with our backs against the wall. Mr. Robert and the Locktons ate and drank. I watched them close. The husband was a full head taller than his wife, but he was also twice as large as most men. His shoulders rounded forward, and his neck seemed to pain him. He often reached to rub it. He said he was a merchant with business in Boston, New York, Charleston, and he complained how much the Boston uprising cost him. A merchant is a guy who buys and sells stuff. His missus sipped Jenny's chowder. She shuddered at the taste, and she reached for a mug of small beer. She stole glances at us from time to time. I could not figure what kind of mistress she would be, how she would treat us. In truth, I was struggling to think straight. The air in the tavern was heavy, and the weight of the day pressed against my head. When the men took out their pipes and lit the tobacco, Ruth sneezed, and the company all turned to consider us. Well then, my wife is looking for a serving wench. Come here, girls, said Mrs. Lockton. I took Ruth by the hand, and I stepped within reach. She studied our arms and our hands, and she looked at our feet. She made us take off our kerchiefs to look in our hair for fleas and nits. Can you cook? Not much, ma'am. Just as well. I don't need another cook. What do you do? We scrub your house clean. We care for cows and pigs. We work your garden. We carry everything. My aunt trained them herself, Mr. Robert added, and they come with blankets and shoes. Why not wait, Anne? Procure another indentured girl in New York. Indentured servants complain all the time, and they steal us blind at the first opportunity. I'll never hire another one. Jenny set the tray on the table so hard the cups rattled in the saucers. Are you sure we need 2? These are uncertain times, dear. This one looks simple. Is she addle-pated? quite a word. Addlepated. It means not smart. Ruth gave a shy smile. I spoke before Mr. Robert could open his mouth. She's a bit simple, ma'am. She does what she's told, though. In truth, she's hard worker than me. Give her a broom and tell her to sweep, and you'll be able to eat off the floor. Jenny poured a cup of coffee and set it in front of the missus, and spilled a little on the table. She's prettier than you, Mrs. said, and she knows how to hold her tongue. She turned to her husband. The little one might be an amusement in the parlor. The big one could help Becky with the firewood and the housekeeping. Jenny pressed her lips tight and poured coffee for Lockton and Mr. Robert. I do not brook foolishness, she said to me. Ruth shook her head from side to side. No foolin'. The missus cocked her head from one side and stared at me. And you are to address me as madam. I expect obedience. Insolence will not be tolerated, not one bit, and you will curb your tendency to talk. Yes, ma'am. What say you, Anne? We sail with the tide. I want these girls, husband. It is Providence that put them in our path. How much do you want for them? He named his price. Our price. 2 for 1. Being sold like bolts of faded cloth or chipped porridge bowls. Wait. I'll take them. The table froze. A person like Jenny did not speak to folk like the Loxtons or Mr. Robert. Definitely not in that manner. Lockton stared at her as if she had grown a second head. I beg your pardon. Jenny set the kettle on the table, stood straight. I want those girls. I need the help. We'll pay cash. Keep to your kitchen, woman. Madame Lockton's words came out sharp and loud. Did she change her mind? Will she really take us? Work in the tavern wouldn't be bad, and maybe Jenny would be kind to Ruth. I could ask around for Lawyer Cornell's papers. Maybe we could find Miss Mary's will. I'd work extra to pay Jenny back for the money we cost her. I'd be fair and square. Ruth and me could stay together. We'd stay here, close to Mama. Please, God, please. Leave us, Lockton said to Jenny, and send your husband over. Jenny ignored them. It'll take us a couple of days to get your money together. We'll give you free lodging in the meantime. Mr. Robert's eyes darted between the two bidders. Ruth yawned. I crossed my fingers behind my back. Please, God, please, God, please, God. Madame Lockton flicked crumbs to the floor with her handkerchief. Dear husband, these girls are a bargain at double the price. With your permission, might we increase our offer twofold? Lockton picked at his teeth. As long as we conclude this business quickly. Madame stared at Jenny. Can you top that offer? Jenny wiped her hands on her apron, very silent. Well, said Madame Lockton, I cannot pay more. My husband will tally your account. She hurried for the kitchen door. Mr. Robert chuckled and reached for his pot. Well, then, we had a little auction here after all. Such impudence is disturbing, Lockton said. This is why we need the king's soldiers here. He pulled out a small sack and he counted out the coins to pay for us. I thank you, sir, for the meal and the transaction. You may deliver the girls to Hartshorn, my ship. If you please now. Come, Anne. Madame Lockton stood and the men stood with her. Good day to you, sir. Safe voyage, man. The Locktons made their way through the crowded room. Mr. Robert dropped the heavy coins into a worn velvet bag. The thudding sound as they fell to the bottom reminded me of clods of dirt. Ruth put her arm around my waist and leaned against me. So that's the end of chapter 3. They have been sold to the Locktons, who are of New York, and they seem like loyalists. So she's not going to be a field slave. She's going to be a house slave, which is kind of all there was in New York anyway. Okay. I'm going to do a little bit of chapter 4. Monday, May 27th to Wednesday, May 29th. Really getting the day by day here. 4 chapters on one day. Oh my God. So it took 2 days and 2 nights for our ship, the Hartshorn, to sail from Newport, Rhode Island, to the city of New York. Ruth and me were housed below the boat's deck with 6 sheep, hogs, 3 families from Scotland, and 50 casks of dried cod. Cod is fish, and dried cod was a big commodity back then because salted dried cod would keep without refrigeration. It was food that would stay. Big deal in those days. At the far end of the hold were crates of goods stamped Lockton and Foot. Casks of rum with the same marking. That's him, Lockton, he's a merchant. I spent most of the voyage bent over a puke bucket, bringing up every scrap of food and swallow of brackish water I choked down. Ruth stood on a box looking out a porthole, counting seagulls. In a whisper that could barely be heard. The seas calmed late on the second night, and I was able to walk a bit. She's seasick. Ruth was sound asleep in her hammock, thumb in her mouth. The hatchway to the deck was open, and it was tempting. I climbed the ladder slowly. The few sailors on watch saw me, but did not say a word. The fat moon lit the water like a lantern over the looking-glass. A clean, cold breeze blew from the north, pushing the ship so fast across the sea we seemed to fly. I sat on a crate facing the back end of the ship, and I hugged my knees. The coastline of Rhode Island had long disappeared into the darkness. I could not see where we came from or where we were going. So she was up deck now. She definitely shouldn't have been there, but it's night, and they're not saying anything. Maybe the ship would spring a leak and sink. Maybe we'd be blown off course and land in a country without New York or people who bought us and sold children. Maybe the wind would blow us in circles until the end of our days. Mama said that the ghosts couldn't move over water. That's why kidnapped Africans got trapped in the Americas. When Papa was stolen from Guinea, he said the ancestors howled and raged and sent a thunderstorm to turn the ship back around. But it was too late. Ghosts can't cross the water to help him, so he had to make his own way in a strange place, sometimes with an iron collar around his neck. All of Mama's people had been stolen too. Taken to Jamaica from Africa, where she was born. Then she got sold to Rhode Island from Jamaica. And the ghosts of her parents couldn't follow her or protect her either. They kept moving us over the water, stealing us away from our ghosts and our ancestors who cried salty rivers into the sand. That's where Mama was now, wailing at the water's edge, while her girls were pulled out of sight, under the white sails that cracked in the wind. All right, that's the end of Chapter 4. On the next Chapter 5, Wednesday, May 29th, they land in New York. The inhabitants of New York are in general brisk and lively, says the beginning of the chapter. It rather hurts the European eye to see so many slaves on the street. There are computed between 26 and 30,000 people living in New York. The slaves make at least 1/5 of that number. That was a letter written by Patrick Robert, a Scotsman visiting New York, to his family. So they start each chapter with a little bit of real primary historic evidence. It's kind of cool that way. This is a very well-written book. All right, so like all these amazing historic fiction books, they start a little slow before they unfold. But soon she will be in New York, and she will be embroiled in the American Revolution. Yes. And it's an amazing story. I've read it, of course. See you tomorrow.